Stepmother chained fat girl in cellar and charged people to mock her. Mountain man heard and exploded. 50 cents to see the beast in the basement, the stepmother purred, voice satin over a blade. Spit if you like. She doesn't mind. She's too fat to feel it. Blackstone, Colorado, winter of 1881. The town's lamps burned yellow against a sky the color of iron, and word of a scandalous spectacle drifted like smoke from the Ashford mansion on the hill. Behind its polished doors and velvet curtains, Felicity Fliss Ashford, 22, soft-cheeked, broad-shouldered, tender-hearted, sat chained by the throat to a stone wall. The ring rubbed her skin raw. The chain clinked when she reached for the tin cup of water rations. She learned to move slowly, to keep the metal quiet, because the sound made the paying crowds laugh. Vivian Ashford, all jewels and perfume, had waited until her husband rode east on business. Then she sent 2 hired brutes to drag Fliss from her bed, clamp the iron collar shut, and bolt the hatch. By morning, the whispers had begun. By nightfall, the line at the back steps stretched past the coal shed. A rare curiosity, Vivian called it, the way one might advertise a 2-headed calf. A living cautionary tale. Men elbowed boys to the front. Ladies pressed lace handkerchiefs to their noses and pretended shock while fishing coins from their muffs. They peered through bars that should never have been in a Christian household and tried out clever cruelty the way gamblers test dice. Fliss learned not to cry. Tears brought jokes. Silence brought stones. She pressed her back to the cold foundation and went somewhere far away in her mind, into remembered kitchens that smelled of cinnamon and peace, into her late mother's lap, into any room where no one stared. But memory has thin blankets. Winter has long teeth. On the 3rd month of this pageant of humiliation, a new shadow fell across the stair. Boots stopped on the lowest tread. The lantern's circle caught a face like red rock and eyes the color of old oak. Titan Ty Stonewall had come down from the high country with a pack-horse of pelts and a list of supplies, and in the saloon he'd heard the town's laughter curdle into gossip. He paid his 50 cents without blinking. He did not step back at the smell. He did not smirk when he saw the collar. His jaw set, and the lantern flame shivered as if the air itself had tensed. "Sir," the doorman chirped, eager for tips, "you may poke the creature with this stick. Some gentlemen find—" Ty closed his hand around the stick and snapped it as if it were a dry twig. Then he wrapped both fists around the iron grill. The bolts groaned. The bars bowed. Somewhere above, a bell rang for another round of visitors. Below, in the dim, a mountain finally moved. "Miss," he said, voice low and steady over the tortured squeal of metal, "look at me." She did. "You are coming with me." Vivian Ashford did not descend the stairs so much as glide, the swish of silk hissing like a snake in winter grass. Behind her came Brutus and Magnus, shoulders like an ox yoke, knuckles scarred from work that never asked questions. They filled the passage with the stink of cheap pomade and old violence. Ty Stonewall stood between them and the broken cage, one palm steady on the lantern, the other bracing the bowed bars he'd just torn aside. "You will pay for the damage, woodsman," Vivian said, smiling only with her teeth, "and for the theft of my household property." Ty's gaze did not move from the iron collar, sawing a red ring into Fliss's throat. "She is no one's property." "On the contrary," Vivian purred, presenting a folded paper with a flourish. A guardianship order witnessed by respectable men. My stepdaughter is subject to my care and discipline, which includes keeping her out of public view for the family's sake. She is unsightly. Fliss shrank at the word the way a burnt hand flinches at a stove. Unsightly. She had been fed synonyms for years. Unpresentable, cumbersome, shame. Each one stuck like burrs. Each one taught her to make herself small. She pulled the too large coat Ty had thrown over her closer, the leather heavy with the clean scents of snow and pine pitch and smoke. For the first time in months, something on her skin did not hurt. Brutus took a step. Ty did not look at him. "Touch her," he said, calm as a winter creek, "and you'll spend the week learning to write with your left." Magnus paused, measuring the man who had bent steel bare-handed. Vivian's smile thinned. "Call the sheriff," she said to a maid peering from the stairwell, "and fetch the judge. There will be consequences." "Ma'am," Ty said, finally lifting his eyes to hers. "There already are." He slid the lantern to the floor, stooped, and lifted Fliss as if she were made of quilts and not of bruises and fear. The chain clinked against the stone. The collar stayed. The tether lay broken. His arm under her knees was a steady shelf. The other supported her shoulders, careful not to jostle the scabbed skin of her neck. Fliss's breath came shallow, as if she feared the air up here might be rationed too. "What's your name?" Ty asked as they moved for the stairs. Felicity," she whispered, then corrected herself with a courage so small it was almost invisible. "Fliss." "Fliss," he said, and the way he said it sounded like a promise, not a label. "We're going out the front door." On the ground floor, the house unveiled itself in cruel contrast. A music room with a gleaming pianoforte, a parlor papered in imported damask, a hallway crowded with family portraits where Fliss's mother's face had been taken down and replaced by Vivian's. The staff lined the corridor with expressions that slid away when Ty's eyes touched them. On a table by the door, a silver dish held coins from the evening's ticket take. Ty did not glance at it. He had come down the hill for coffee, salt, lamp oil, and left with something no store sold. The front latch gave under his shoulder. Outside, Blackstone glittered with frost. At the bottom of the hill, men hunched in the glow leaking from the saloon windows. Laughter rolled up the street. A dog trotted past with a butcher's paper crown. Fliss tucked her face against Ty's coat. The night air bit at the damp at her hairline and tasted astonishingly of freedom. A carriage rattled to the curb. Sheriff Abram Pike climbed down, stomach first, mustache combed to a needlepoint. Beside him, Judge Silas Grimwood swaddled himself in fur the way other men wrap themselves in certainty. Vivian sailed out onto the porch with a hand to her breast. "Officers," she said sweetly, "you see what I am forced to endure? Assault in my very home. That brute destroyed a lawful restraint and abducted my dependent." Sheriff Pike squinted at Ty. He'd thrown drunks into snowbanks bigger than this man, but none who looked so composed, holding 20-odd years of human heartbreak like a child. "That true?" he muttered. Ty adjusted his grip on Fliss so she wouldn't feel the shake that threatened his hands whenever he looked at the raw edge under the collar. This woman chained her stepdaughter in a cellar and sold tickets to mock her. I broke the chain. "Colorful claim," Judge Grimwood said, voice oily with skepticism. "Have you evidence?" Ty turned so the lantern light from the doorway fell on the ring of abraded skin, the infected sores, the bruises that bloomed in old and new violets. Silence fell over the porch like snow. Even the sheriff's swagger hiccuped. Vivian's voice sharpened. She is large-boned and melodramatic. The collar was symbolic restraint. She refuses to obey. She gorges. Sloth is a vice like any other. Fliss's fingers curled in the hem of Ty's coat. She could feel herself being discussed the way ranchers discuss a balky mule. Deficiency catalogued, remedy prescribed. She had learned to drop her eyes in such moments, to disappear into her body like a frightened animal into a burrow. Instead, she lifted her chin. It trembled, but it lifted. "My mother," she said, voice scratchy but steady, "taught me to make orange cakes at Christmas. We read the Psalms after supper. I nursed father through influenza last spring because Mrs. Ashford refused to sit by a fever. I am not a spectacle. I am a person." It was a simple ledger of facts, submitted to men accustomed to ledgers. It moved something in Sheriff Pike that sermons hadn't touched. He cleared his throat. "Judge, seems unconventional, keeping a lady below stairs in irons." "Unconventional is not illegal," Grimwood snapped. "The guardianship is clear." Ty's mouth was a hard line. He didn't trust the law in rooms where it wore cologne. He trusted what he could carry, what he could build, what he could break when it had no right to stand. But he also knew the difference between rescuing and stealing. He took a breath that tasted like iron rails cooling in night air. "Sheriff," he said, "Doc Whitmore's 2 streets over pulling a boy through pneumonia. Come look at what a doctor calls this, not a judge with a fountain pen. If he says the collar stays, I'll set it back myself." Pike hesitated, then nodded, a small rebellion against habit. "Fetch the doc," he told a deputy. They waited in a silence padded by frost. Fliss's weight settled trust against Ty's chest. He found himself counting her breaths without meaning to, the way a man counts hoofbeats in a storm. Dr. Whitmore arrived with his bag and the indignation of a man dragged from work that matters into theater that doesn't. One glance, one hiss, and the word torture left his mouth like a prayer said backward. "Get that thing off her," he said, already reaching for salves. "Now." "Unnecessary dramatics," the judge began, but his voice faltered under the doctor's stare. Ty looked to the sheriff. Pike lifted both hands, palms out, a surrender or permission. "Do what needs doing," he muttered. The collar's lock was stubborn and ornate, a jeweler's joke. Ty wasn't laughing. He set Fliss on a settee just inside the door, braced the ring with a folded towel so steel wouldn't bite flesh, and with a wedge and mallet from his saddlebag, kissed the seam once, twice. On the third blow, the lock surrendered. The ring fell open with the tired clack of a lie exposed. Air touched skin that had not been bare in months. Fliss caught it like a drowning woman finds surface. The room swam. She clutched the collar halves for an absurd heartbeat, as if some punished part of her needed proof that they could be held and not worn, then let them fall. They hit the parquet with a sound like a verdict. Vivian gathered herself for another performance. "You will be sued into—" "No," Ty said, and the word had the finality of a gate dropping. He lifted Fliss again, turned, and stepped out into the starlit cold. Behind him, the town looked smaller. Ahead, the road up country glittered. He did not offer Fliss a future he could not guarantee. He offered only the next true thing. "We'll get you warm," he said. "Then you'll choose your life." She exhaled like a cathedral letting go of smoke after a fire. "Take me away from here," she whispered. "Please." Then that's what we'll do. The road out of Blackstone wound like a pale scar through pine and shale, climbing into the high country where the air turned clean and cruel. Ty guided the wagon with one hand on the reins, the other steady on the shotgun across his knees. Beside him, wrapped in his spare blanket, Fliss sat so still she might have been carved from frost. They'd left before dawn. The sheriff, perhaps out of conscience or cowardice, had not followed. Behind them, the town shrank to a cluster of lanterns guttering against the horizon. Ahead, the mountains waited, blue-gray and immense, the kind of silence that makes men honest. Every jolt of the rutted road made Fliss flinch, her body remembering blows that weren't coming. Ty saw it, but said nothing. He had learned long ago that silence could be a kindness, that words sometimes scraped more than soothed. Instead, he adjusted the blanket higher on her shoulders. She startled anyway, then whispered, "Thank you." Her voice was softer than the wind through pine needles, but it carried something fierce, the will to survive. By midday, the sky bruised with snow. Ty pulled the wagon under a rocky overhang where a stream trickled half-frozen. He built a fire fast, efficient, every movement practiced, kindling, flint, breath. The first crackle of flame startled Fliss into tears. She began, then pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. "I'm sorry. The sound. It reminds me of laughter." Ty squatted beside the fire, feeding it gently. "This laughter won't hurt you," he said. "It'll keep us alive." He ladled stew from his pot, rabbit, barley, a hint of thyme. When he passed the tin bowl to her, Fliss hesitated. Months of starvation had taught her that food came with conditions. "Eat," he said simply. "All of it?" She did, slowly, as if relearning what kindness tasted like. Afterward, she watched the fire with wide eyes. "Why did you come?" she asked. "You could have turned away like everyone else." Ty stared into the flames. The answer was older than he wanted to admit. "Because once," he said, "I didn't, and someone died for it." He didn't explain more. She didn't ask. They both understood that pain has its own language, and silence is sometimes its truest accent. That night they camped on a ridge. The sky was crowded with stars, fierce and cold. Ty laid his bedroll a few feet from hers, a respectable distance that still let her see him if she woke afraid. When she finally spoke, her voice was small but steady. "I used to dream about the mountains," she said. "I thought they were the edge of the world, somewhere no one could find me." He glanced at her across the fire. "They're not the edge, but they'll give you space to breathe. Do you live here alone?" "Been that way a while." "Because of the person who died?" He nodded. Fliss traced a finger through the frost near her bedroll. "I know what it's like," she murmured. "Losing everything that made you believe you could be loved." Ty's jaw tightened. "You didn't lose that. It was taken." For a long time, only the fire spoke. Then Fliss said quietly, "Then maybe we both can take it back." Days turned into a rhythm of motion and quiet. Ty hunted. She cleaned what he brought back. When he cut wood, she stacked it. Her strength returned slowly, marked by small victories, a longer walk, a steadier hand, a laugh that came without apology. One afternoon, she found wildflowers stubbornly blooming through the snow, yellow as candlelight. She picked one and set it on the wagon seat beside Ty. "For you," she said shyly, "to thank you." He didn't look at her right away. I didn't do it for thanks. I know, she said. That's why it matters. That night, he found the flower pressed in his journal. He didn't remember putting it there. On the 5th day, a storm caught them halfway up the pass. Wind howled like wolves. Snow blinded the trail. Ty shouted over the gale, "There's a trapper's cabin an hour ahead. Can you hold on?" Fliss nodded, though her lips were blue. By the time they reached the cabin, a squat structure of logs half buried in drifts, she was shaking uncontrollably. Ty carried her inside, kicked the door shut, and went to work. Fire first, blankets, then soup reheated on the flames. He'd done this before, for himself, for others who hadn't survived. He knelt beside her, rubbing warmth back into her hands. "Stay awake, Fliss." "I'm trying," she whispered, "just so tired." He leaned closer. "Don't quit now. You made it this far. You hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, catching the firelight. "You sound angry." "I am," he said softly, "at what they did, at how much it cost you to live." Her lips curved faintly. "Then maybe we both survived something, didn't we?" He smiled despite himself. "Maybe we did." When morning came, the storm had passed, leaving a world remade in white. Ty stepped outside and breathed deep. Behind him, Fliss stirred, her voice rough but lighter than before. "Is it always this beautiful up here?" "Only when you survive the climb," he said. She smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her. "Then I think I'm finally seeing it." He turned toward her, the sunlight on her face, the ghost of chains gone from her neck. Something in his chest loosened, a knot untied by the sight of hope reborn. He didn't say the words forming in his mind. "You're safe now." Words like that belong to promises, and promises are fragile things in the mountains. Instead, he nodded toward the rising peaks. "Let's keep moving," he said. "Home's still waiting." Fliss rose, wrapped in the blanket, her steps careful but sure. For the first time, she walked beside him, not behind, and somewhere above them, the mountains seemed to breathe, approving, alive, and endless. The cabin sat on a shelf of stone above a valley where the pines met the sky. Smoke drifted from its chimney in a thin, steady line, the kind of smoke that meant survival, not comfort. When Ty pushed open the door and stepped inside, the air held the faint scent of cedar and the memory of solitude. "This is home," he said simply. Fliss stood at the threshold, clutching the blanket around her shoulders. To her, it looked less like a house and more like a chance, rough-hewn, imperfect, but hers to rebuild. The floorboards were scarred, the walls darkened by years of firelight. A single window faced the mountains, the glass fogged by cold breath. There was a stove in the corner, a bed of rough timber, shelves filled with jars, and an empty chair facing the hearth. She whispered, "You live here alone?" Ty nodded, setting down his pack. "Been a long time since anyone else stayed." "Not even family?" His eyes flickered toward a closed door on the far side of the room. "Not anymore." Fliss said nothing. Grief, she knew, was a room best entered quietly. The first weeks passed like a slow thaw. Fliss slept for long hours, her body relearning peace. At night, when the wind moaned against the walls, Ty would stoke the fire and listen for her breathing, steady, fragile, alive. She woke often in panic, her hands clawing at the air as if she still wore chains. The first time it happened, Ty was there before she could scream. "You're here," he said, voice calm and deep. "No cellar, no locks, just air. Her sobs quieted against his shoulder. The warmth of his presence was like stepping into sunlight after a lifetime underground. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I don't know how to stop remembering." "You don't stop," he said. "You live past it." By day, he taught her small things: how to split kindling without splintering it, how to mend torn cloth, how to tell a storm's approach by the silence of the forest. She learned quickly, eager to feel capable again. One morning, she surprised him by cooking breakfast, corn cakes and venison stew, the scent filling the cabin. Ty sat down without a word, picked up a spoon, and took a bite. "Well?" she asked nervously. He swallowed, then said, "You trying to take my job, Miss Ashford?" It was the closest thing to a joke she'd heard him say. She laughed, a sound that startled them both. After that, laughter began to visit more often, not loud or frequent, but real. She would hum while sweeping the floor, and he'd pause his work just to listen. He started carving small figures of wood in the evenings, birds, bears, a horse, and left them on the windowsill without comment. When she asked once, "Why do you carve them?" he said, "Hands remember what hearts forget." Fliss found a small patch of frozen soil behind the cabin and began tending it. She planted seeds she'd brought from town: mint, sage, and wild rose. "They'll grow in spring," she said. "Flowers make a place feel like it's been forgiven." Ty didn't argue. He built her a fence to keep the deer out. Sometimes, when the nights stretched too long, she'd ask him to tell her about the mountains. He'd speak of hidden lakes, of wolves that sang like mourners, of stars so close you could almost touch them. And then she'd ask, "Why do you stay up here?" His gaze would drift to the fire. "Because the world down there knows too many names. Up here, I can forget mine for a while." Fliss looked at him then, really looked. The quiet strength, the patience, the sadness that hung on him like a shadow. "I think the world would be kinder if it knew more men like you," she said softly. Ty shook his head. "Kindness doesn't need men like me. It needs people like you." By spring, her body had healed, but the invisible wounds lingered. Sometimes she'd catch her reflection in the window and flinch, not from vanity, but from disbelief that she could exist in light again. Ty noticed. One evening, he found her standing outside, staring at the valley as the sun set fire to the snow. "Tell me what you see," he said. "I see a woman who lived in a cage and forgot how to stand tall." He came beside her. "Then look again. I see someone who walked out of hell and didn't let it burn her heart." Tears welled in her eyes. "You talk like you believe that." "I've seen proof of it," he said, eyes on her. "Every morning you wake up here." She turned to him then, trembling, not from fear, but from something deeper, something alive. For a moment they stood like that, breath mingling in the cold air. Then Fliss stepped back, breaking the spell. "Good night, Ty." "Good night, Fliss." The way he said her name carried a kind of reverence, as if it meant more than a word. It meant survival. Summer came soft and green. The garden bloomed, the stream sang louder, and so did Fliss. She had begun to write again, small entries in a notebook she'd found on his shelf. "It helps," she explained, "to put things in order." "What do you write?" he asked. "Everything I don't want to forget. The sound of wind, the way stew tastes after snow. The first night I slept without dreaming of chains." Ty smiled, a rare and quiet thing. "Then that book's worth more than gold." She tilted her head. "Maybe I'll let you read it someday." "Maybe I'll deserve to," he said. The day he finally told her about Rose was the day the rain came. They were repairing the roof when thunder rolled low across the valley. He sat down, shoulders wet, and said, "There was someone once. Her name was Rose." Fliss listened in silence as he told her about the woman he'd loved, about the child they'd lost in a storm, about the guilt that drove him into the mountains. When he finished, she took his rough hand in hers and said quietly, "She must have been loved well." "She was," he said, his voice breaking a little. "Then she'd want you to live," Fliss whispered. He looked at her then, and something in his chest shifted, a gate opening. That night, when the rain softened to a hush, Fliss lit a candle and placed it by the window. "For her," she said. Ty watched the flame flicker. "And for you," he added. "For me?" He nodded. "For all the things you're becoming." Outside, thunder rumbled once more, distant and fading. Inside, warmth held. Fliss sat by the fire, the orange light painting her face in soft gold. "Ty," she said quietly, "when I was in that cellar, I stopped believing the world had room for me. Now, I think maybe it does." He met her gaze. "Then the world just got better for it." And in that quiet cabin, where ghosts once ruled and storms once punished, two souls began without ceremony to build something neither had expected to find again. Not a rescue, not a redemption, a beginning. The mountains had a way of keeping secrets, but so did men. For a while, Ty Stonewall thought both could stay buried. Then, one autumn morning, a horse appeared on the ridge, a dark bay mare with the kind of saddle no trapper used. Fliss spotted it first from the garden. "Someone's coming," she said, her voice uneasy. Ty stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. A rider in a wool coat raised one gloved hand in greeting, then dismounted with the careful grace of a man used to walking into trouble. "Name's Marshal Ellery," he said. "Got business up here, Mr. Stonewall." Ty's expression didn't change. "I don't live by that name any more." The marshal's mouth curved slightly. "Maybe not. But the man who did once stood trial for manslaughter and vanished before sentencing. Hard to forget that kind of name." Fliss stiffened beside him. "Is that true?" Ty exhaled slowly, as if the question had been waiting for years. "I killed a man, yes. He was hurting a woman. I stopped him too late, and the law said I went too far." Ellery nodded. "Paperwork calls it excessive force. Folks in town called it justice. But the judge didn't like mountain men taking the law into their own hands. I'm not here to drag you back, Stonewall. Word in Blackstone is you broke another set of laws. Vivian Ashford's kind. That woman's got friends with deep pockets." Fliss's face drained of color. "She's still alive." "Alive and loud," the marshal said grimly. "Claims you kidnapped her stepdaughter, destroyed her home, stole her property. There's talk of bounty hunters coming north." Ty's voice was calm, but the fire in it was old. "Let them come. They'll leave lighter." Ellery shifted uneasily. "You'd best keep clear of town for a while. But if they find this place—" He glanced at Fliss. "You both could be in real danger." When he left, the air seemed colder. That night, Fliss couldn't sleep. She sat by the fire, the shadows flickering across her face. "You killed a man," she said at last, softly, as if testing the weight of it. Ty didn't deny it. "I did. A husband who thought his wife was furniture. She didn't survive, neither did the man. I turned myself in, but the law wanted a story that fit their comfort, so I left." Fliss watched him in silence, her heart heavy, not with fear, but recognition. "Then you've been running as long as I was locked away." "Maybe longer," he said. "Only difference is my prison had better scenery." She reached across the table and touched his hand. "I don't care what you did to stop cruelty. You saved me. That's what I know." Ty didn't pull away. His voice roughened. "You shouldn't have to keep forgiving the world just to live in it." "Maybe forgiveness is the only way to make it livable," she said. He looked at her for a long time, then said quietly, "If they come, we run. But if they touch you—" "I know," she whispered. "You'll stop them, but don't die for it." 2 days later, the warning proved too late. At dusk, hoofbeats thundered up the trail. 5 men in dark coats, rifles slung low, faces wrapped in scarves. Ty recognized the leader instantly, Goliath Blackstone, hired muscle from the rail camps, a man who measured his worth by the pain he caused. "Well, if it ain't the mountain ghost himself," Goliath sneered. "Lady Ashford says you've been keeping her property warm." "She's no one's property," Ty said evenly. "Funny," Goliath replied, drawing his revolver. "That's not what the $50 notice says." Ty's rifle cracked first. 1 man fell. Then chaos erupted. Gunfire flashing in the dusk, smoke curling like breath from the throat of hell. Fliss ducked behind the wagon, clutching the small pistol Ty had taught her to use. Her hand shook, but she held her aim. Goliath's men advanced through the trees. Ty moved like a shadow. 2 shots, then silence, then another. But there were too many. A bullet grazed his arm. Another shattered the cabin's window. "Ty!" Fliss screamed. "I'm here!" he called, reloading. "Stay down!" When Goliath stormed the porch, Ty met him head-on. The 2 men crashed together like colliding boulders. The fight was brutal, close, fists, elbows, breath. Goliath's knife flashed. Ty caught his wrist, twisted, drove the blade into the doorpost instead of his throat. "You think you can save her?" Goliath spat, blood on his teeth. "You'll bury her like the last one." That name, the wound of it, made Ty's vision narrow to a single pulse. He slammed Goliath back through the doorway, over the table, the sound of splintering wood echoing like thunder. Fliss saw the chaos through the smoke. Without thinking, she raised her pistol. 1 breath, 1 pull. The bullet struck Goliath in the shoulder. He screamed, staggering backward into Ty's waiting hands. Ty caught the man's collar, his voice low and cold. "This is for her, and for every woman you ever thought was yours to break." He threw him out into the snow. The remaining bounty hunters broke and ran, leaving their wounded leader behind. When it was over, Ty stood panting in the doorway, blood dripping from his arm, gun still raised. Fliss ran to him, eyes wide. "You're bleeding." "It's nothing. It's not nothing." She tore a strip from her skirt and pressed it to the wound, her hands trembling. "You can't keep doing this alone." He caught her wrist, not rough, just certain. "I'm not alone anymore." By dawn, the snow was crimson where the fight had been. Ty buried the dead near the ridge and burned their weapons. Fliss stood beside him, pale but resolute. "Will they send more?" she asked. "Maybe, but after what happened, it'll take them a while to find men willing to ride this far." She looked toward the valley below, where mist curled like smoke. "I don't want to run any more." He turned to her, something fierce and tender in his gaze. "Then we stand." For the first time, she smiled at that, not out of defiance, but belief. Weeks passed. Ty's wound healed, the scars did not. He spent his mornings chopping wood, his evenings sitting beside her while she read aloud from her journal. One night, she closed the book and said quietly, "You think we've paid enough for the past?" He looked into the fire. "The past doesn't take payment. It just stops charging interest when you start living." Fliss reached out, tracing the line of his hand. "Then maybe we start living, Ty." He looked at her, then really looked, and for once didn't look away. Winter returned early that year, gray skies heavy as judgment, the wind howling down from the peaks like a warning. Ty had a feeling in his bones before the dog started barking. Vivian Ashford had come back to claim what she'd lost. She didn't come alone. The crunch of hooves echoed off the valley walls, followed by the glint of rifles and the flash of scarlet wool. 5 men rode behind her sleigh, mercenaries from Denver hired to do what bounty hunters had failed to finish. From the porch, Ty watched them climb the ridge. His breath steamed in the cold air. His hand rested on the rifle beside him. Inside, Fliss packed supplies, food, blankets, the small carved figures he'd made her. "We can go over the pass," she said. "We can disappear." He shook his head. "If we run now, she'll keep hunting. It ends here." When the sleigh stopped 20 yards away, Vivian stepped out, her boots sinking into the snow. Time had not softened her. Cruelty had preserved her like ice. Her fur cloak shimmered, her diamonds burned with fire stolen from others. "Well," she said, voice sharp as frost, "the beast lives, and so does my stepdaughter." Fliss stood in the doorway behind Ty. "I am not your daughter," she said evenly, "and I am not yours to own." Vivian laughed, brittle and cold. "You think you can rewrite blood, Felicity? You think one brute's pity makes you a person?" She turned to Ty. "You took what wasn't yours. Now you'll pay for it." Ty stepped off the porch. "You're right," he said quietly. "She's not mine, but she's no one's to hurt again." Vivian signaled her men. Rifles lifted. For one frozen heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then the mountain thundered. Ty fired first. The shot echoed off the cliffs, dropping the lead rider before he could aim. The rest scattered for cover. Fliss darted back inside, grabbing the spare rifle. "Stay down," Ty shouted, but she ignored him, kneeling by the window, steady hand shaking only once before finding their mark. Another man fell. Snow flew in all directions as gunfire shattered the stillness. Ty moved like a man forged for this, every motion efficient, deliberate, a storm contained in flesh and bone. Vivian screamed from behind the sleigh, "Don't let him live! Burn it all if you must!" That was her mistake. Ty caught the glint of a lantern swinging from one man's saddle. A spark. Oil. Fire. "Fliss!" he bellowed. "Get out! Now!" She ran toward him just as the first flames caught the cabin's eaves. The fire climbed fast, orange against white, roaring its hunger. Ty shot the lantern-bearer and turned to see Vivian aiming a pistol straight at Fliss. "No!" The gun cracked. Fliss stumbled, gasping, but it wasn't blood on her dress. The bullet had torn through the edge of her sleeve. Ty's return shot was silent compared to the thunder in his chest. Vivian's pistol fell to the snow. Her eyes went wide, not from pain, but disbelief, that anyone would dare end the play before she wrote its final act. She fell without grace, her cloak blooming crimson. The fire raged, eating memories, walls, years. Ty grabbed Fliss's hand. "Come on!" They ran through the snow, stumbling, coughing, until they reached the frozen stream below. From there, they watched the cabin collapse into itself, sparks rising like spirits. "It's gone," Fliss whispered, voice trembling. "Everything." He turned to her, brushing ash from her hair. "Not everything. You're here. That's enough." She looked up at him, eyes shining, cheeks streaked with soot and tears. "You mean that?" "I've never meant anything more." She leaned into him, her forehead against his chest. For the first time, he let the silence between them mean peace, not punishment. Above them, the snow began to fall again, soft, clean, forgiving. By morning, the fire had burned itself out. The sun rose over the blackened clearing, turning the smoke to silver. Ty and Fliss stood hand in hand, facing the ashes. "Where do we go now?" she asked. He looked toward the mountains. "Home." She frowned gently. This was home. He shook his head, smiling just a little. "Home's not a place, Fliss. It's whoever waits for you when you're lost." Her breath caught. "Then I'm home already." He took her face in his hands, kissed her softly, and for the first time since the day he lost everything, Ty Stonewall felt the weight of guilt lift. The mountain had taken enough. It gave something back. When the smoke thinned, the world looked new again. Burned bare, yes, but clean. Ty and Fliss spent the first days in quiet labor. They buried the dead far from the cabin's remains, marking the graves only with stones. No names. Some didn't deserve them. Then, from the ashes, they began again. They built smaller this time. A single-room cabin near the stream, sunlight spilling through its unfinished roof. Ty cut the logs himself, and Fliss stacked them, her hands blistered but proud. "You don't have to," he told her more than once. "I do," she answered. "I need to build something that isn't pain." So they built together. By the time spring came, wildflowers had begun to creep through the black soil. Fliss tended them like old friends, whispering to each seedling as it reached for the light. "See?" she told Ty one morning, kneeling by a patch of mint. "Even after fire, the ground remembers how to grow." He crouched beside her. "Guess it runs in the family." Fliss smiled, soft, real, unguarded. She looked at him for a long time before saying, "Do you ever wonder what happens now that we've survived?" Ty's eyes went to the mountains, their peaks still crusted with snow. "Surviving's only the start. Now we live." She stood, brushing dirt from her hands. "Then live with me, not out of pity, not out of debt, just because." He rose slowly, meeting her gaze. "Because," he echoed, the word heavier than it sounded. "Because you're the first light that didn't blind me." Fliss stepped closer until her hands rested against his chest. "And you're the first silence that didn't scare me." He smiled faintly. "Then I reckon we're even." That evening, they sat by the fire, their fire, in their rebuilt home. The walls glowed honey gold. Outside, the stream whispered over stones, a lullaby for a world finally at peace. Fliss leaned against him, her voice barely above the crackle of the logs. "When I was in that cellar, I prayed for someone to find me. I didn't pray for love. I thought that was too much to ask. But you came anyway." Ty traced a thumb along her knuckles. I didn't come to save anyone. I came because the world was wrong. Then you showed me it could still be right. She turned her face toward him. Then let's keep it that way. He kissed her, a quiet, steady promise, born not from rescue, but choice. When dawn broke, the smoke from their chimney curled straight into the blue. The cabin stood small against the endless mountain, but from its window came the unmistakable sound of laughter. Two voices, alive, free, and somewhere deep in the woods, where snow melt fed the wild roses, the world, at last, was gentle again. Some stories begin in darkness, chained and cold, but end in light. Felicity Fliss Ashford was mocked, imprisoned, and called a monster, until one man saw her as human and refused to look away. Titan's stone wall broke more than iron that night. He broke the curse of cruelty itself. If you're listening somewhere far from these mountains, London, Manila, Hanoi, or Texas, remember this. Your worth isn't decided by who tried to cage you. It's proven by how you rise when someone hands you freedom. If you still believe love can heal what cruelty once destroyed, then this story was meant for you.